So building trust is a massive factor when I'm working with victims of sexual abuse. And often the lack of trust is often cemented in their experience of being sexually abused. So there's a lack of trust of others, there's a lack of trust of self, and that manifests itself also in the room. There's this fear that they're going to have to tell me all the intricate details, and that is absolutely not the case. Often, by the time a client is able to tell me that there has been a sexual abuse, it's about the fact is that we've built up that trust. And so the fact that they're able to tell me that in and of itself is symbolic of where our relationship is. So there is no need to re-traumatize. Someone doesn't need to re-traumatize themselves by giving me the explicit details. I'm sure you have that same experience, Malcolm.
I do, that when people contact me, it's not unusual for them to say, you're the first person I've told that I've been abused as a child. And when they say that, they're not telling me the precise detail of what happened. It's just revealing the fact that they are someone who is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And certainly when I first talk to them and meet them, I do not ask and I do not expect them to tell me what happened to them. Why would they do that? Because, as you've indicated, they don't trust people. Once they've been abused, they find it very difficult to trust other adults. And therefore, I'm very sensitive to that and would not ask them and do not feel I need to ask them. It's only as our relationship progresses and they feel more comfortable, and that can be over quite a long period of time, that they then feel that they're able to tell me what happened. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they tell me face to face, because that can still be very difficult. And sometimes they will, because they just feel they're able to, which is fine. Or alternatively, they feel, well, let's talk about it over the phone. I can tell you over the phone because you're not looking at me and I'm not looking at you. Or I'll write to you. I'll write to you and I'll send you something, perhaps on an email or something like that, setting out, because again, it's easier to commit it in writing and use certain words rather than speaking those in person. And I understand that. So I would never ask someone at a very early stage precisely what happened, although as their lawyer and to ensure I can act in their best interest, I ultimately need to understand. That's way down the line. Those early conversations are in a much broader sense to understand the environment in which it occurred and how it occurred rather than the detail of it. And I suspect from what you've just been saying, it's the same thing for you. It's when they feel sufficiently relaxed and confident and trustworthy, they feel now, that's when I can talk. But until then, it's step by step, which is why it's important to have long-term support from you in the private sector rather than just simply relying on the NHS short-term, because there just isn't 6 sessions or a dozen sessions or even a few more. It's just, in my experience as a lawyer, and having worked with survivors of childhood sexual abuse, that it's nowhere near long enough in order to build out the relationship that you can learn about what's happened to them. And again, I sit from a position of ignorance because I don't treat these people, but surely you would sort of say that only when you've got to know them over months and months and months and months can you really begin to say, right, now this is how I think. I can help you about those issues, particularly as you say, the initial reason for coming to you may be nothing to do with what happened to them as a child, but they've just, for good reasons, they've masked it, but it's only through your sessions with them you've begun to see actually the underlying issue here is something that happened to them as a child. But to get to that point must take a long time.
Indeed, and I think the way that I work is in a non-directive. It's a non-directive approach, which is I let the client lead. I let them lead, but then I will be curious. So that's when I'll say, I've just noticed. And I think that letting the client lead is so helpful because there is what comes out of that is unexpected. So, for example, if I have a hunch there may have been sexual abuse, I won't necessarily say I'll just let the client go where they're going. And that means that once that trust is in place and they feel able to disclose, again, I'm not going to come in with all my own curiosities. I'm going to let the client dictate, let them lead where they take me. And I think that because we have that time and that space, we're building the rapport and the trust, those are all the bedrocks of what make the therapeutic relationship work. And if we know that the legacy of sexual abuse is a lack of trust in others and self, what are we saying when we offer somebody 6 sessions to begin to heal? Who's going to develop that trust in such a short? Now, whilst there may be some progress, I think it's somewhat naive to believe that within 6 sessions or even within a group setting that somebody is going to get the healing that they need for the legacy of a traumatic event.
Yeah, I entirely agree. Who knows, when we're sitting down talking about this again next year, perhaps we'll be talking about the fact that, you know, the NHS is now to provide much greater support, but I suspect it will still continue to struggle, and therefore we will be talking more and more about the need to persuade government that it does really need to provide extra financial resources to ensure that people can have that first tier of support before, I think, in reality they need to turn to you, Keeley, because you and I know from working with these people on a long-term basis that they really do need ongoing support, and that even when they get to that point where you kind of feel they've reached that point and they can go off and, you know, into the world in a much better place, the reality is that they will stumble, they will fall, and they will need to come back, just perhaps only for 1 or 2 sessions, but who knows whether it'll be in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because there'll be those life events that none of us can predict that will just cause them to stumble again and say, look, I just need to be restabilised and put back on the path to ensure that I just don't regress, because that would be a terrible thing to happen. Anyway, again, thank you for joining me again, Keeley, and no doubt, as I say, we will be talking again next year during Sexual Abuse Awareness Week.
Thank you, Mel.